How does this fly in the face of our connection to a creator?
Well, the aliens created us. Our bodies are just meat sacks. They're places that our soul lives in. Our soul has to develop and to learn to live with integrity and without envy, hate, or fear. And this is just a suit we're given for our bodies. They're called containers. We live a life, and after we die, we're immediately reunited with all our friends who have passed away for about a few minutes, and then we're taken someplace, and we're shown every single little nasty thing we ever did in our life, and every good thing, and there is no judgment of whether it's good or bad, and then we're put back into a newborn baby about 3 days old, and then we do it all over again, and we keep reincarnating like that until we have learned to live with integrity and without envy, hate, or greed.
Very interesting. John Leonard Walson, on your site, you say is the biggest discovery ever.
Right. He was the first one to catch the pictures of those weaponized satellites that we have been putting up for the last 40 years. And he happened to catch pictures of them. And they're fascinating because the pictures he has are fascinating pictures of technology that is far beyond anything that the American public knows about.
Let's go back for just a moment about when you said that the moon was towed in. Where did you get that information? How did you get it?
The information, if you'll go back in history, in the early memories of man, there are several writers. You can look at Velikovsky, and he wrote a lot about this. In the earliest memories of man, there was a time when there was no moon, and then there was two moons, and then there was the moon that we have today. That moon was towed here about 15,000 years ago in order to be a keeper. Now, the information about it being made in the bowels of Jupiter comes from Sleeper Lou Baldwin from his website. And he's been around a long time, so he knows a lot of stuff. Now, the actual towing vehicle was called EMV, Electromagnetic Vehicle. And a retired Lockheed engineer wrote a book called The Ringmakers of Saturn. He wrote how this EMV works because he took some of the Voyager 1 and Voyager 2 photos, original from NASA, and he found in the rings of Saturn some very large spaceships, the largest of which was 30,000 miles long and 2,400 miles in diameter. He puts these pictures in his book, The Ringmakers of Saturn. But at the end of the book, he talks about where the EMV grabbed on to the moon to tow it, and that was Mare Orientale. You can see the rings around it where some electromagnetic vehicle grabbed onto it. And then I was talking with Norman one day, and I said, well, where do you think that EMV vehicle is now? And he says, I think it's on the backside of the moon. And so I looked at the pictures of the backside of the moon that I had, and I found it in the crater Tchaikovsky. And it's very interesting that NASA has gone to utmost lengths to keep the pictures of Tchaikovsky a secret. They make the vehicle look like a piece of land, but if you'll go on thelivingmoon.com, you'll see that we found, just purely by good research and by accident, a picture of the electromagnetic vehicle sitting right in the middle of the Sea of Tchaikovsky, or the Mare Tchaikovsky. How we got it was a friend of ours in Florida was researching some NASA pictures, and she was looking at thumbnail pictures that were available. And what they did is, on one of these thumbnails, they thought they'd just print the real picture because it was too small to see anyway. But with the techniques that we have today of enlargement, we can enlarge it all the way up and see what's really there. What they didn't bother to do, or what they forgot to do, was enlarge that picture, change it to what they wanted it to look like, and then reduce it back down to a thumbnail. They just printed it as a thumbnail. And that's how we got the real picture of the electromagnetic vehicle that towed the moon from Jupiter and placed it in orbit around the Earth.
The whole relationship to the moon has lost its romantic quality for me right now. The moon has been so romantic for all of us. Now it's a satellite. It's really, it's mind-boggling. It's mind-boggling. What do you think Richard Branson founder of Virgin Galactic, who is going to be sending people for suborbital flights around the Earth. What do you think he knows regarding the true scenario?
Nothing. He doesn't know anything.
How is all this money amassed?
Where does the money come from?
Yeah.
Drugs. We control all the drugs distributed in the world. And one of the reasons we pulled off the 9/11 was we wanted control of the drug industry in Afghanistan. Now, most of the illegal opium and marijuana drugs are grown in the Hindu Kush, which is in northern Afghanistan, and their output in 2001 was 15% of the world's supply. In 2007, according to the New York Times, it was 95% of the world's supply. Now, the Taliban didn't do that, and neither did Al-Qaeda. They just don't have the resources. It was us that did it. We went in there into Afghanistan under the pretense of fighting a war against the Al-Qaeda and Taliban in order to get control of the Hindu Kush. And there's hundreds of thousands of acres where marijuana and opium are grown and shipped north to Kazakhstan and then shipped and distributed by various secret groups around the world. And that's a tremendous income. That's trillions of dollars that we use for programs that we want to do that we don't want to tell the president or Congress about. If there's one thing the intelligence or the secret government hates to do, it hates to go to Congress and ask for money, because Congress always wants to know, well, what are you going to do with it? And they don't want to tell them what they're going to do with it. So the best thing is to control the world drug market and distribution and use all that money for whatever they want. It's a cash crop. It's cash money that they can do whatever they want with.
Some people may feel and think that because you have flown missions for the CIA, that how do we accept you? How do we receive you? How do we believe you? What are we to think about you?
You don't have to believe me. I flew for the CIA. I was a pilot, and they don't tell pilots anything. I was not an agent. I was not an operative. I didn't have a file. I was a contract pilot. They'd call me up and say, go from here to there, and I'd go from here to there. They would tell me nothing about what I was taking or what was in the back or why I was doing it. I just did it.
Got it. Let's talk a little bit about the NASA scientist that was fired who promised disclosure.
Who was that?
Is it Hoagland?
Well, Richard Hoagland, I don't know whether he was fired or I never heard that story. But
okay, I'm sorry. Excuse me. It was Ken Johnston, was it?
Oh, Ken Johnson.
Yes. Let's talk about Ken Johnson.
Yeah, I don't know too much about him. I read Hoagland's book called Dark Moon or Dark Missions or
right.
Yeah. And it's a very good book, but, Hoagland believes that what we're seeing on the moon is an ancient society. It's not. It's living and thriving today. He talks about these glass domes that you can see in the Apollo pictures, but the Apollo program was a fake. You're seeing pictures that were taken on a set. Most of the stuff he talks about is wrong, even though I credit him for getting me interested in this with his videotape, Moon-Mars Connection number 2, which showed me the gigantic 6-mile-high tower in the middle of the near side that we can see near Sinus Medai. And it's a huge, huge structure supported by a tripod, and on top of it there's a square or a cube that's 1 mile on each side, and it's transparent. It's like it's made out of glass. When I first saw the pictures of that, boy, I thought that was really neat. About the same time, I was reading a book by Joe McMonagle.
The remote viewer?
Yeah, and he talked about following a soul. He was tasked to follow a soul after a man died in a car collision between Monterey and San Francisco, and he followed it towards the moon. And he's got closer and closer. A voice started telling him, do not come any closer. This is not your place. You're not allowed here. And he followed it until the noise got so loud and so threatening that he broke off the chase and didn't go any further. But then that kind of clued me in. If the soul was going to the moon, where was it going? And I thought, well, it might be going to that great big tower. Maybe that's a transfer tower where they transfer souls. There are various schools of thought on that. There's transfer stations on Earth, but when you die, your soul goes into a transfer station. You're allowed to see your past loved ones, and then you get a review of your life, and then you're reincarnated into a baby about 3 days old, and you start it all over again. And there's several and I don't know how many. There's several of those transfer stations around Earth.